In this video, you'll discover why Francis of Paola, though not widely known, may be considered one of the most intriguing mystics to have ever lived. He was a 15th century Italian miracle worker, and hundreds of years after his death, in a number of different countries around the world, there are Francis of Paola statues, monuments, and celebrations to honor him. But why is Francis of Paola remembered with such love and respect? He was renowned for his magical powers over the natural world, including the ability to command fire, move massive boulders, and converse with animals. He was said to have performed miraculous healings, even curing entire villages of the plague. He is also credited with restoring vision to the blind and raising the dead on several occasions. Although many people associate the name Saint Francis with Francis of Assisi, some argue that Francis of Paola's life was even more miraculous and even more sensational. Despite this, there is relatively little information available about him in the English language. Ashley and I are an everyday couple from Canada, and we were inspired to travel to Italy, learn more, capture video footage, and share the enchanting story of Francis of Paola. Even if no one watches our video, we're still excited to share the story of Francis of Paola with our friends, like little Nicholas the woodpecker, and all the little forest angels. The story of Francis of Paola begins before his birth. Giacomo and Vienna d'Alessio prayed to Francis of Assisi for help in having a child after years of trying. One night, their neighbors were awestruck to see dancing flames above the d'Alessio's home. The d'Alessio's came outside and were just as puzzled as their neighbors. They concluded that the bizarre phenomena was a sign from a higher power, and 9 months later, Francis of Paola was born. And a month after his birth, little Francis developed a severe infection in one eye. His parents prayed to Francis of Assisi again, this time promising that if he provided a miracle cure, they would have their son Francis wear the monk outfit and serve for 1 year in a Franciscan monastery. And after this prayer, Francis's eye was mysteriously healed. Years passed, and when he was 13 years old, Francis of Paola woke up one night to find his room filled with light, and St. Francis of Assisi standing at his bedside. St. Francis of Assisi told him that it was time for him to fulfill his mother's promise and serve in the monastery. While at the St. Mark's Monastery, Francis of Paola is said to have performed a number of miracles that absolutely amazed the monks. For example, one time he made the sign of the cross in front of a fireplace, which magically caused it to burst into flames and boil a pot to cook their food on time. After a year of serving in the monastery, Francis moved out and started to live in a little cave. Despite his isolated lifestyle, Francis soon attracted a large following of people who were drawn to his wisdom and his spiritual guidance. In 1436, Francis founded the Order of Minims, an order dedicated to poverty, humility, and service to the poor. In addition to their spiritual practices, Francis and his followers started building a church. During construction, workers complained of thirst and the long distance they had to go to get water. In response, Francis struck a rock wall, causing water to gush out of it. This spring, called the Cucurella, still exists today, and the water from it is believed to have special healing powers. When we arrived on site, we found that the healing spring was protected behind a small door and realized that we weren't the only ones locked out. On the little door was a friendly praying mantis, and we named her Brigida. I invited Brigida onto my hand, and she joined us for our entire tour of the St. Francis Sanctuary. As we continued to explore, we came across this bomb from World War II that was dropped into the nearby stream and did not explode. The locals consider this a sign of the divine intervention of Francis of Paola. Here, Brigida uses her little leg to point something out to us. It's the Grotto of Penance. This is a small cave Francis lived in after he left home. At this cave, he would spend entire days and nights in prayer. At one point, Francis and his followers were building a church, and there was a large heavy stone in the middle of the area where they wanted to build. Despite their best efforts, nobody was able to move it. Francis ordered everyone to back away and knelt down in prayer. And to the amazement of all present, the stone lifted itself up, out of the ground, and out of the way. This furnace is the location of two legendary miracles of Francis of Paola. On one occasion, the furnace was damaged. Despite the fact it was blazing with fire, Francis made the sign of the cross and walked straight into the flames to repair the problem inside the furnace. He miraculously emerged with no signs of fire damage anywhere. The eyewitnesses were completely baffled. And on another occasion, some hungry workmen had caught, slaughtered, and ate Francis's pet lamb, Martinello. When Francis found out what had happened, he asked what they had done with the remains of the poor lamb. The workers told him they had thrown all the leftover fleece and bones into the furnace. In response, Francis walked over to the furnace, which was roaring with flames, looked inside and called out, "Martinello, come out!" To the amazement of all present, the lamb leaped out of the furnace, alive and well, making happy sounds upon seeing his master again. On one occasion, Francis was meeting with a group from the village of Arena, Italy. People showed up hungry, but the group had forgotten to bring food for the meeting. Francis turned to one of them, named Nicola Bonaro, and said, "Give me your pouch. I am certain that there is bread in it." To the amazement of all, Francis reached into Nicola's pouch and pulled out a loaf of bread that was hot, as if it had just been taken out of an oven. He shared the bread with the people, and as he did, the bread multiplied, allowing everyone to eat their fill with still plenty left over, reminding people of the miracles of Christ in the desert. Around this time, the Pope had heard reports about Francis and was unsure of what to think, so he sent a representative to investigate him. Francis and his followers adhered to a strict plant-based diet, primarily consuming fruits and vegetables, abstaining from any animal products. This concerned the Pope's representative, who criticized Francis for setting an example that was too severe. However, Francis demonstrated his faith by picking up and holding hot coals and showing that his hands remained unharmed despite the intense, burning heat. He was demonstrating that through the grace of a higher power, a person could endure extreme conditions if necessary. Francis's miraculous demonstration won over the approval of the Pope and his representatives. They considered Francis to be divinely guided. Francis performed one of his most breathtaking miracles at the Strait of Messina. Francis and his companions were unable to pay for a boatman to take them across from southern Italy to Sicily. He knelt down and prayed about what to do. Then he got up and spread his cloak on the waves. He sailed 4 miles smoothly and effortlessly on his cloak, using his staff as a sail, leaving the onlooking boatmen in wonder and awe. As he approached the shore of Messina, a large crowd had gathered to see the miraculous sight. To avoid them, he sailed to a secluded area of the shoreline and made his landing. Later, Francis was transported by a boat, and after he disembarked, the boat faced a storm for a day and a night. One of the crew members, named Philip Fabalengo, discovered a pair of sandals that were left behind by Francis, and Philip threw the sandals into the turbulent waves. To everyone's surprise, the raging waters became calm. Because of stories like these, Francis became considered a patron saint of boatmen, mariners, and naval officers. Similar to Christ, Francis of Paola was known for performing miraculous healings. One instance of this was when he healed a handicapped child. Francis prayed and then asked the child to repeat the name of Jesus 3 times. To everyone's amazement, the child was actually able to speak clearly for once and repeated the name of Jesus and was instantly restored from their condition. In a similar manner, Francis healed a 12-year-old girl who was both deaf and mute. He also gave back sight to many blind people through different techniques, such as using the sign of the cross, using specific plants, or using holy water. At one point, a young mother gave birth to a boy who was born without eyes and with a horribly deformed face. With the index finger of his right hand, Francis traced the outlines of a mouth and eyes on the distorted face of the baby. As he did so, the mouth and eyes appeared as if by magic, and after that, the baby had a normal, happy face. Francis of Paola was also famous for his ability to resurrect the dead. For example, Francis and his companions once came across the dead body of a man who had been hanged. Francis asked his companions to bring the corpse down to him. He then lifted his eyes to the sky and prayed, and the man was miraculously restored back to life. Realizing what had happened, the man was filled with gratitude and became a devoted follower of Francis. Francis's reputation as a miracle healer became widely known, and King Louis XI of France, known for his cruelty, sent for him. Francis only agreed to go because the Pope ordered him to do so. While traveling to France, Francis and his group passed through Lauria, Italy, and noticed that their donkey, also named Martinello, had worn out his shoes. They stopped at a blacksmith shop, and Francis asked if the blacksmith could provide new shoes for the donkey in the name of charity. The blacksmith nailed the new shoes onto Martinello's hooves, and when the job was done, he insisted on payment. When Francis explained that they had no money to pay, the blacksmith became very angry. Francis calmly told Martinello to give the shoes back. And the donkey obediently shook his hooves, and the shoes magically fell off. After witnessing this miracle, the blacksmith was shocked, humiliated, and repentant. While in Naples, Francis and his group were invited to stay with King Ferrante. The king had doubts about Francis and arranged for peepholes to be cut in the door to Francis's room so that he could spy on him. Late at night, King Ferrante snuck down the hallway and peered through a peephole to see Francis floating in midair while his body was glowing in light. The king was flabbergasted. After he had regained his composure, he snuck back to his room, completely convinced of Francis's holiness. But King Ferrante wanted to test Francis's discipline to his vegan diet. The king had a young servant named Girolamo Cavaniglia, and he ordered young Girolamo to bring a plate of cooked fish to see if he could tempt Francis to eat any of it. When Girolamo placed the fish down, Francis passed his hands over top of the fish, and the fish were brought back to life and started moving around. Imagine how shocked young Girolamo must have been. Then Francis told Girolamo to carry the dear little fish back to the king and tell him that in the same way that life was restored to the poor fish, he wanted to restore freedom to the innocent people locked up in the king's prisons. Girolamo raced back to see the king. King Ferrante was shaken when he received this message, and he was stunned to see that the fish had been brought back to life. He put the fish on display in vases where they became a source of wonder for the royal court. King Ferrante also wanted to see if Francis was truly committed to poverty, so he offered him some coins in private to try and tempt him. Francis took one of the coins and effortlessly split it in two, and drops of blood dripped from the two halves. He declared that the blood represented the suffering of the innocent people King Ferrante had enslaved. The king was so disturbed by this that he couldn't even speak. By the end of the visit, King Ferrante was a true believer in Francis. He even hired an artist to paint a portrait of him, by spying through the peephole, of course. Francis traveled to Borma, France, where the plague had caused widespread illness and death, resulting in great fear and suffering among the townspeople. According to legend, when Francis arrived in Borma, he found that the local church was under construction and some workers were really struggling to lift a heavy wooden beam into place. Francis approached them and touched the wooden beam, saying to it, "In charity, you must serve the house of God without causing so much frustration to these good brothers." The heavy beam then became lightweight, and the workers were able to easily lift it into place. News of this miracle spread quickly throughout Borma. The church was soon crowded with people, all seeking Francis's help to be freed from the plague. Francis made the sign of the cross over them, and they were all instantly healed. People were so grateful that they flocked to him, and in their enthusiasm, they even tore off pieces of his tunic and hood. However, we're told that as each piece was torn off, the tunic and hood miraculously restored and renewed itself. As Francis prepared to leave, a large crowd gathered to thank him and receive more blessings. Unable to make his way through the packed crowd, Francis used his supernatural powers to disappear right before their eyes. He then reappeared before his travel companions, who were waiting for him outside the city walls. To this day, Francis is recognized as the patron saint of the modern-day city of Bormes-les-Mimosas in France, and he is celebrated every year on May 4th. We're also told that he went on to heal plague outbreaks in the nearby towns of Fréjus and Toulon. Because of this, some consider him to be the patron saint of epidemics. When Francis met King Louis XI, who was in poor health, the king initially had doubts about him and put him to the test by offering him temptations such as a gold statue of the Virgin Mary and money. Each time Francis refused these gifts, instead suggesting that the king give them to the poor instead. King Louis had hoped that Francis would physically heal him, but Francis told the king that it wasn't the will of God for him to be healed, and so he must prepare himself for death by getting his soul in order and healing his indifference to love. Francis understood that our time on earth is brief and that our ultimate goal should be spiritual progress rather than just prolonging the physical life. King Louis had a reputation for being intelligent but also very mean and sneaky, so people called him the Spider King. One might expect that King Louis would severely punish or torture Francis for not healing him. After all, he'd been healing so many others. Despite this, King Louis was inspired by Francis and started to see the importance of being a more loving person above all else. Despite not being physically healed, Louis died a peaceful and loving man thanks to the guidance of Francis. Impressed by the transformation in King Louis, Francis of Paola was invited to remain as an advisor to the royalty for an extended period, and during that time, his order of minims started to expand to other nations. Francis of Paola, like Jesus, died on Good Friday. He was 91 years old, and it was the year 1507. Before passing away, he confessed to not always being as devoted as he could have been. He asked for forgiveness, prayed for others, and returned to his home in spirit. He was canonized as a saint just 12 years later. He is known as the patron saint of boatmen and epidemics, but his life also sets him apart as a saint of miracles. There are resources available that can help you learn more about Francis of Paola, such as many of the books featured in this video. Additionally, you could share this video with someone else to open up a discussion about him. And we'll be reading all the comments on this video, so please share your thoughts and leave a comment below. You may also want to visit Calabria, the region in Italy where Francis is from. The region offers beautiful landscapes and very friendly people and very friendly animals. It's also a great place to experience the spiritual presence of Francis of Paola. And do you remember little Brigida, the praying mantis? We figured the one thing Brigida wanted was the healing water from behind the door. So we picked her up a little vial from the gift shop and we anointed her with it. She even drank some of it. We were reminded that just like with King Louis of France, sometimes the greatest healing we all need isn't a physical healing, but healing our indifference to love. Francis lived by the principle of charitas, which encompasses love and compassion for all. So let's follow in the footsteps of Francis by making a sincere daily effort to have more love. Love for other people, love for animals, love for little creatures, love for God, and love for ourselves. Because when we love greatly, we live greatly.